Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of 1897 by Kimberly Mullins, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Prologue. February 1898, Yukon, Canada. Mark shivered as he huddled beside a large rock. He pulled the bag closer to him and watched the snow pile up. He'd been grateful when that snow covered his trail, but now he silently cursed it, knowing it could lead to his imminent death. "Did you find him?" one of the men yelled over the howling wind. "He has to be around here," came another voice. "If he is, he's half frozen. Let's go back to camp." "I want to find him." "He can't go anywhere. We'll find him and take the gold from him, even if we have to pry it out of his cold, dead hands." The voices trailed off and Mark was left alone. He burrowed further down and tried to remember the last time he'd been warm. Texas and Oklahoma, he thought. Now that was heat. So dry I felt like I was breathing in dust. The more he thought about that time, the warmer he got. The last conversation he had there drifted through his head. Gus was saying, "The Yukon sounds interesting, and it might be where I go next. I'll see. I wonder if he's on his way, and if I'll live to see him." Chapter 1. Late April 1897, Chicago, Illinois, USA. The editor of the newspaper, Don Galloway, looked down at the paper in his hand and out into the area where his reporter sat. He scanned the room, and his gaze settled on a young man hunched over his typewriter. "Mark," he called out. The young man looked up and brushed his dark brown hair off his forehead. "Just a minute, I need to finish the story," he said in a distracted voice and started to type. The editor nodded and called back. "Come see me after you get that done. The paper would need to be turned in by the evening." He knew Mark would have his story in on time. Galloway went back into his office and pulled other story ideas he needed to assign. Bang! The door to his office hit the wall. The editor looked up abruptly at Mark. Mark grabbed it and closed it quietly behind him. "Sorry about that," he said. Galloway didn't comment. Instead, he asked, "Did you get your story in on time?" "Just now," Mark confirmed as he ran his hand through his thick hair. "Sit down," Galloway directed. Mark sat in the chair opposite the editor's desk. He picked up the paper lying in front of him. "I have a story idea for you. You haven't been out on the road for a while, and I thought you might want it." "Definitely." Mark sat forward eagerly. He didn't like to stay in one place for too long. The goal was for him to see as much of the world as he could. "Did you figure out a way to get me to the Yukon?" He had been campaigning to go as soon as gold was discovered the year before. Galloway looked over his glasses at Mark. "Not yet." Yet. So there's a chance." "I'm not ready to share that information," he said dismissively. "Oh, what's the story you want to brief me on?" Galloway handed the paper to him. Mark read it through twice before he looked up in disbelief. "Outer space? You like adventure, don't you?" the editor asked, sitting back in his chair. He waited to see what Mark's response to this story would be. Yes, I do." Mark had been working in Chicago the last few weeks and was itching to get back out on the road. But was this something he wanted to investigate? He shook his head. "Don, was someone drinking and telling stories? You don't really believe this." "Well," Galloway quantified, "what we know or what's been reported is that a flying object was seen and appears to have hit a local judge's property." "What's the judge's name?" asked Mark, taking notes. "Judge J.S. Proctor. Witnesses reported a cigar-shaped craft with bright lights passing low. The object hit the judge's windmill and it broke apart. People heard an explosion and a fire was reported that could be seen for miles." "Where did this happen?" Mark asked, hoping it was at least somewhere interesting. "Texas." "That's a big state. Can you narrow it down?" the reporter asked, still unsure if this was a story for him. "Aurora, Texas." Mark frowned. "I don't think I know that town." "It's somewhat northwest of Dallas. The town is small." Mark thought about that and thought this might turn into something interesting. And while he hadn't been to Texas in a while, he made up his mind. "I can do it. When should I leave?" The editor smiled. The stories should stir people's curiosity and sell papers. "You should go soon. This type of story will be in all of the newspapers. Good human interest stuff." "I'll get my tickets and head out tomorrow. Report back as soon as you conduct the interviews." Mark went to his desk and pulled out a map of the U.S. Much of it was now composed of individual states. Reviewing the route, he was thankful that the trip would be primarily by train. Traveling from Chicago to Dallas would require multiple transfers. The final part would be some type of alternate transportation from Dallas to Aurora. He gathered some gear into his shoulder bag and pulled on his suit jacket. He didn't include a knotted tie in his daily wear. Mark swung his bag on his shoulder and put his hat in place. He walked over to the editor's door and knocked lightly. When Galloway looked up, he said, "I'm headed out. I'll let you know what I find there." "Mark, there have been other sightings that match the one you're investigating. Take it seriously. Also, keep your eyes open for any other events that we can have articles written on." Mark's on-the-road articles usually generated interest. "I will," he said, and waved absently as he exited the office. Mark whistled as he descended the stairs to the ground floor of the newspaper office. Even though he wasn't excited about the story, he was happy to be on the road again. His first stop would be the train station to get his tickets, and then he would head home by walking and catching the trolley. By the time all of his errands were completed, it was late in the afternoon and the sun was starting to set. He was headed home to the boarding house where he and his family had lived since he was 12. George and Elizabeth Sutherland had moved to Chicago to give Mark a safer environment to grow up in. The owners of the boarding house had saved them from a kidnapping and had continued to be their close friends. He looked up at the 4-story building with a large stoop in front. Home, he thought. It was somewhere he would always treasure. He went in and made his way upstairs, waving at the people in the sitting room. Packing was foremost on his mind, and he wanted to get organized before the dinner bell rang. He entered his room and went over to the closet to pull out his carpet bag. For the trip, the trip for the piece he'd been assigned would be a little over a week. His packing would have to include clothes for any detours he might encounter before he returned home. He dropped the bag on the bed and went to the dresser to get his shirts and socks. The door opened abruptly and Mark didn't turn toward it. Instead, he continued to pack. The individual entered at a run, jumped on the bed, and bounced Mark's bag on the floor. "Hey, Enzo," Mark said, looking over at the other man before bending down to pick up his bag and placing it back on the bed. Enzo stretched out, making himself comfortable. "Hey," he said. "Move over," ordered Mark. Enzo moved. He sat up, braced himself on his elbows, and watched Mark continue to pack. Where to now? The two were the same age, in their 20s, and had grown up together. Enzo had moved to the boarding house when he turned 18. "A little town in Texas," Mark said shortly, not wanting to share more information about the trip. He wasn't sure how he felt about it. Enzo saw the hesitation and immediately questioned, "What are you going to cover?" "It's nothing," his friend said dismissively, hoping Enzo wouldn't press him. Enzo saw Mark's face reddening and knew there was something more. "Tell or I'll torture you," he said lightly, or he threatened lightly. Mark looked at him and his build. He was more muscular than Mark and had wrestled him to the ground before. He gave in. "Okay, fine. There was a flying object that crashed, and the thought is it might be from outer space." "Wow," Enzo said and sat back. Now he wanted to go with his friend. When do you plan to come back?" He had had some time between his engineering projects. "It could be a while. It'll take time to get there and back." "Oh, well, that won't work. It does sound interesting." He laid back on the bed and shot up a second later. "But you'll be back by May?" Mark frowned. "What's the reason you want me back by a specific date?" "Well, you might miss the wedding," he said, smiling brightly. "You haven't proposed to Ruth yet," Mark exclaimed. He stopped his packing and walked to his desk chair to sit down. He began jotting down some notes for the trip. "I will at some point, and I want you to stand up for me." Mark shook his head. He knew Enzo always had a plan. "If it happens, I wouldn't miss it. You need to give me plenty of notice when you get back home. You need to give me plenty of notice to get back home." "How come? It isn't just the one story?" "Yes, but you never know, other things might pop up." "Like in Boston?" Enzo said knowingly. 2 years ago, he had been assigned a project to work as a structural engineer on the Boston subway. Mark had gone to cover the news of how the city planned to take the business street and place it underground. The story had changed in April when workers discovered human remains under Boylston Street. The story was too good to miss, and then the bodies, Mark remembered. "Yeah, you ended up staying almost as long as I did." "I got 2 articles out of that trip. My editor was happy with that one." Plus, it was fun to be away and hang out together, Enzo reminded him. Won't you be headed back to Boston soon? Yeah, they want to start this thing up in September, so if I'm not married, I guess I'll go back. I think you're going to Boston, Mark muttered. What was that? Asked Enzo, though he had heard what his friend said. Nothing, not a thing. Enzo let that go and changed the topic. So, Texas, with travel time? At least a week of travel, and then the time there, and maybe another week back if I don't find another story. Enzo looked down, his smile gone. Mark noticed. Hey, I'll be back, he assured him. I know, it would be nice if you worked around here. That isn't who I am, Mark thought. Enzo, you know I get antsy if I'm not on the road looking for the next adventure. So many things were changing. He wanted to see them all. Reporting was the one job that combined his two talents, writing and adventuring. Take me to the station tomorrow morning? Yeah, I guess so, his friend said in a low voice. Hey, cheer up, I'm here now. At that moment, the dinner bell rang. Come on, it's dinner time. That should cheer you up, Mark said. Enzo already looked happier. I hope there's pie. They went down the stairs together and into the dining room. Everyone was seated at the table. The first person Mark saw as he entered the dining room was his mom. He went to her immediately and kissed her cheek. He nodded to his dad. Dad, he said. His dad nodded back to him. Enzo claimed a seat next to Ruth. Mark noticed she pulled away from him as he scooted closer to her. She also didn't return his smile. Odd, thought Mark, and put it out of his head. Dinner was delicious as always, and the conversation was loud. Everyone else filed in as Mrs. Spencer and her assistant Hazel finished putting food on the table. The food was passed around and conversation flowed between the people. Around the table were his mom and dad, Enzo's brother Marco, and sister-in-law Mara. The other boarders included 2 engineers from Prussia, Carl and Willem. Mark mentioned his trip the next morning. Do you need me to take you to the train station? His dad, George, asked. Mark took a quick drink of water before saying, No, Enzo is going to take me. Enzo paused as he reached for a tray of meat and grinned. I'll make sure he gets there. Can you tell us about where you're going next? Asked Mara. Enzo laughed loudly. Ruth squirmed next to him as he teased his friend. Yeah, tell him about it. Enzo's face infused with color and he glared at Enzo. His father noticed and said, Now I have to hear about this trip. Mark finally commented, It's a human interest story, so not a big deal. Someone saw something and I'm going to interview them. What did he see? Prodded Marco. Mark mumbled, Something that flew through the air. His dad heard and frowned. Was it a balloon? He asked. I don't think so, Mark said noncommittally. His mother looked thoughtful. I've heard of flying machines. That's right, said his dad. Wasn't the first flight in an airship made by Ernest Jägels? Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, it crashed and the flying machine was beyond repair, commented Willem. Mark looked interested and said, Just a minute. He went to the sideboard and got his notebook. Can you tell me where this was? Prussia, volunteered Willem. Mark's dad turned to the other man. You know the details? I do. It's a type of airship in which there's an envelope of lifting gas that's supposed to be supported by an internal framework, Willem explained. Are they over here yet? Mark asked, taking fast notes. No, not yet, Willem said. Carl nodded in agreement. Oh, Mark said, disappointed. I don't think my editor would approve a trip to Prussia. Do you think someone has a similar type of flying machine over here? Mark's dad asked. You should tell them, teased Enzo. Mark ignored him and said, We're not sure what was seen, but theories exist that it was not of the earth. Elizabeth, Mark's mom, frowned. If not of the earth, where else would it be from? Outer space, said Enzo. The entire table went silent and looked at Mark. Surely not, said his mom, her voice gone high. Yes, that's the human interest part. You saw how you all couldn't wait to hear more about the topic. I'm going to investigate and see if it was man-made or not. Mr. Galloway was right. This could get some readership. He made some notes on the questions he was receiving. How would you know? Was it just a sighting or did they actually find something? Asked Enzo. They found something. It appears that whatever it was crashed, so there should be debris in the field to review. Do you believe it could be from space? Ruth asked in a low voice. I have my doubts, he said. The conversation continued about life on other planets. Was it possible? Mark, commented his dad, keep an open mind and don't make fun of the people you interview. They will all want to be taken seriously. I agree, said Mark. This shouldn't be a funny piece. The interview should be handled in a professional manner. There are also additional sightings that support the event may have actually happened. He thought about this as he went upstairs to his room. They'd given him a new direction for the story, one that excited him. His bags were on his bed, and he took the opportunity to finish packing. When he finished, the bags were moved to sit beside his desk. Before bed, he went downstairs and stepped outside to enjoy the silence and smoke a cigar. He wanted to gather his thoughts before his upcoming trip. The smoke floated in the air as he exhaled. The night was warm and it allowed him to relax. He took a final pull on his cigar and put it out with his shoe. He turned and started to head back in when a soft voice stopped him. Mark, could I speak with you? He looked over and saw Ruth standing in the shadows. With a wide smile, he teased, where's Enzo gotten to? That's what I wanted to talk to you about. He felt uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Ruth, he started. Enzo. Mark, she interrupted. I want to go with you when you leave. With me? Ruth, he started hesitantly, trying to let her down gently. Ruth, I like you, but not like that. He was afraid this was a romantic overture. Mark, she said firmly, I don't like you that way either. I just want to get away from here, from making decisions. What decisions? He asked tentatively. He didn't want to accidentally mention Enzo's proposal. She frowned. I know Enzo's going to propose at some point, and I'm just not ready to make a decision like that. Do you think running away is the answer? I think distance would be a good thing, she insisted. We live here together. We see each other every day. Is it love or just convenience? Ruth had moved to the city when her parents died. She and Enzo had been inseparable ever since she arrived. I just thought, she said miserably, I could go on this assignment with you as your assistant or something. It wouldn't be a good idea for us to travel together. I won't have Enzo hurt that way. I understand. Then I'll have to go on my own, she said defiantly. Isn't there an easier way? He asked. Someone else you could go stay with? There's no one, she said miserably. What about Claire? She has a number of locations where she could arrange employment for you and you could get away from here. Claire Spencer ran a charity that was wide-ranging and helped women move forward. I don't know her that well. Well, I do. I'll organize a note to send to her, but, he cautioned, I won't help you until you've talked to Enzo. There'll be no running off or disappearances. I won't see him hurt like that. She moved to a chair and collapsed. She started to cry. I just need some time and space. Can't you see that? What he saw was a very young girl who wasn't ready for marriage. Talk to Enzo, and then I'll help. But it has to be tonight. I'm leaving in the morning. Yes, your trip. She thought about the packed bag in her room. Then she thought about Enzo, really thought about him. She looked up and in a clear voice, I'll go talk to him now.